Conversations on Effective Conservation with Charles Wells. From theory to practice, lessons learned, and a look to the future.
Let's carry on quickly, and so that's all the theory. Now some practical, how do you put that into practice? So what does 20 years of management really look like? And sometimes it's not as pretty as what we think. Sometimes bridges collapse and trucks crash, and this was actually quite funny. We released these giraffe in Majeti and they jumped in the swimming pool. You remember that? So obviously there's challenges on the ground. This is Bazaruto, one of the islands in Bazaruto. But there are huge challenges. There's many stakeholders there. There's a lot of commercial concession holders there that were there when we got there. Each one of them were managing their little island or bit of island and thinking that they knew how to manage the park. So we've now got to get them all aligned with a bigger vision. Again, who was asking earlier about people living in the park, 6,800 people living actually on the islands, all with traditional fishing rights, which is a big issue. Again, because if it was sustainable and done on an artisanal level, you could actually sustain those communities. But the problem is, again, you've got people from the mainland who are coming in, infringing on those fishing areas, compromising the locals' ability to fish, but also denuding those fish stocks. And again, just to be honest here, the macrofauna, the mammals and the reptiles in Bazaruto are doing fantastically. So the dugongs, I think we've had the highest number of turtle nesting sites, in recorded sort of history there the last few years. Plenty of whales, dolphins, but the underlying fish stocks are actually on the brink of collapse. And that's actually, if we don't get that sorted quickly, we're going to have a major problem there. So we're working very hard now on trying to come up with solutions for again, to support the locals so they don't lose their source of revenue, but making sure there's no take zones, there's areas where those fish stocks can recover. I mean, the good thing about fishing, those of you involved in marine or freshwater fish resources will know they do bounce back very quickly. So that is the one benefit, but we do need to jump in and make sure we control that artisanal fishing practices like seine and gill netting. So that's some Bazaruto challenges. This is Enedi in Chad. Logistical challenges, massive area, 50,000 square kilometers of Sahara, basically, with the sort of sandstone massif. Very little access around their roads. There's no airstrips, things like that. High conflict areas all around. Lots of people that have been using that area for centuries. So there is traditional use, camel trains that have been coming through there for a long time, which are part of it's actually called the Enedi Natural and Cultural Reserve. So there is a cultural aspect to it. And as you can see, there's hundreds of rock art sites dating back from 10,000 years to more recent ones from sort of 8,000 and then 5,000. So there's a couple of waves of rock art there, which just show the history of people that have been using that. But now to try and bring all of that land use into conservation and maintain the biodiversity of the area is obviously hugely challenging. So Malawi and Kota, I showed you the picture earlier with a hard boundary. Malawi's got a high population, also some quite serious poverty issues. So there's hard boundaries there. So human-wildlife conflict's a big problem in Malawi. We have the fences there. People always ask, why do you fence people out? It's more to fence the wildlife in, to protect the people, not to keep the people out. But elephant breakouts there and human-wildlife conflict, big challenge for us there. Obviously, if people vandalize the fence, that just makes it easier for the animals to break out. Commercial gold mining is becoming a big problem for us in Kota specifically, but all over Garamba, it's becoming a problem. South Sudan, we've got it in multiple parks. Matusodona, it's really a big challenge for us. And there's various things for that. Again, just poverty being driven at some of the countries. People are becoming more desperate, so looking for other mechanisms. When I joined African Parks, I think the gold price was around about $1,200 an ounce. It's now sitting at around $1,850. It did peak at $2,000. So there's obviously just more money to be made. It's more commercially viable for people to get into gold mining. But that's also a big problem for protected areas. Impacts on the Boer River. So the Boer River flows through in Kota, but then actually out the park before it joins Lake Malawi. And in that section between the park and the lake, People are extracting water, putting up lots of gill nets, things like that to catch a fish. And that impasa fish or lake salmon, what they call it, is basically now hugely depleted and also on the brink of sort of being wiped out because of the impacts downstream of the park. So we've got to manage impacts outside of the park as well. Just to give the diversity of challenges depending where you are. So Benin is a very specific example where we are on the border of Burkina Faso, and we've actually got extremist militant groups there. So it's not really poachers. But that was actually, we had a lot of tourism in Benin, which is obviously now being completely stopped because of those challenges. And that's basically the last sanctuary for West African lion, elephant in that WAP complex. But the point of that all is our approach that we spent a lot of time talking to basically transcends those challenges. So if you stick to the fundamentals, if you stick to the model, it can actually means you can deal with those challenges in all this country. It doesn't mean there's not necessarily some specific local solution for those challenges, but because you've got a robust model, a robust fundamentals, you can then deal with that. So the economic and social development, health and ecosystem services, and the stability and safety then are effective in all those areas. And I won't go through, I mean, we can talk about the successes, but I won't list them all. But, the economic and social, the ecosystem services, you can look at the figures there, security and governance, even despite those diversity of challenges, because of the fundamentals and because of the model, we still have those sort of successes. So on reflection, in broad terms, the model does work, the approach does work, but it's not easy. And I think apart from the model and apart from applying that, you've also got to be pragmatic and flexible to a certain degree. So, as I said earlier, be nimble, be able to adapt, but still apply the fundamentals. There's always obviously room for improvement. While we think it works and while there's huge successes, we're always learning, and there's still huge areas for improvement. But also, again, remain focused on the accountability and the results. One lesson that we've learned, and something that's a slight nuance to what we've been doing, is moving from passive to active community involvement. So community development's always been part of a model from day one. People think it's, a little bit to Marketa's point, we're a conservation organization. How does community fit in? It's always been one of our pillars, always been there. But it's been a little bit passive that, okay, if we do a good job and look after the protected areas, the community, we need to ask them, and if they're happy, we carry on. There should be a benefit flow. Whereas now we want to bring communities into the management, and especially once these areas around the park is really get the communities to start managing themselves for their own benefit, rather than just being sort of a passive partner on the outside. So that's a bit of a change. And obviously, as in any relationship, mutual trust accelerates delivery. So where to the future? For us, we want to continue to grow. Our goal is 30 parks by 2030. It fits quite nicely in the whole 30 by 30 vision, but that's our own specific contribution. But that's scale and quality. So we can't just grow to 30 without having the quality. We need to make sure the management's there, the quality's on the ground. I mentioned the incubator program. And then the Conservation Academy is quite an interesting one. To your question earlier about local development. So while we always have local development and bring them into the park, it's done more, on a park basis, and mentorship and just on the ground training. Whereas we actually want to accelerate that and develop a conservation academy where people can come and get training in specific practical conservation management. The thinking is to do it in Rwanda. We haven't got final sign-off yet, but we have started talking to the government there, so it'll be part of Akagera, and have sort of a campus on Akagera. Where we're working with the ALU in Rwanda to help us with that. So it's not us doing it independently. There is a registered institute that can then make sure it's a formal qualification, but at least there's a sort of a practical campus where people can get hands-on training. And hopefully that way we can accelerate training for our own people, but it'll also be open to the sector. Other people can send their staff and potential managers there for training. So that's quite exciting for us. It's very much in development, but hopefully with implementation starting next year. So the step change, I think for us, a lot of the technical biodiversity part of things and logistics and governance and all of that is obviously huge challenges. You've seen me list it. But there's normally a technical solution to those. Sometimes it requires money, but it's a scientific or technical solution. For me, the step change is, as I've sort of alluded to already, is the community needs to benefit from nature and have it as a preferred land use. And for that, we need to be innovative. So there's a few things there that we're working on. Other organizations are also working on. Again, it's not us that are necessarily the innovators here, but some sort of conservation dividend. So if an area is doing well and the conservation is benefiting, there's actually a dividend flow to those communities. There's obviously direct resource harvesting, which we already got, like for instance with fish. When it comes to things like elephant and buffalo, it becomes more sensitive, and people don't like those kind of programs. But those are huge protein sources that are now in abundance in some of these protected areas. And if communities could access them and make money, or at least have food from them, that can be expanded. Carbon credits, already quite a big program for a lot of protected areas. But if that could also be expanded into communities where they can directly get those carbon credits and be helped in setting up the governance mechanisms to, first of all, prove the carbon sequestration, but then also have the money flow. And then,
is that something significant for you already? Because it always sounds like something that has potential and is going to come in the future, but maybe you are already in bringing that into your revenue system.
So we've literally signed the first. We've had the carbon credits available for about 2 years now. We've been trying to get them through all the verifications and that, and we've literally about a week ago signed our first one for about $2 million in Benin. So now it's becoming a reality.
So it's a reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's a lot of controversy around it as well, and it's not all clear. And what also makes it difficult for communities is the bureaucracy and the process around getting verified carbon units. So what we want to do is establish a nature unit. We call it a VNU, a verifiable nature unit, which if there's time, I'm happy to talk about that tomorrow or some other time. But again, we're not the only ones working on it. A lot of organizations are, where it's actually a unit of nature that is maintained or improved. And there's a monetary value linked to that nature unit. And if we can get that working, it will be a game changer for us in terms of sustainable revenue. But again, if it's easy to verify, it's easy to prove with things like remote sensing, there's also an opportunity for that money flow into communities, so that nature really is a preferred land use. Because it's all, even communities that are very willing, really want nature, they recognize themselves the depletion of resources that they've been reliant on. The reality is they need to eat, they need to have money, so they're going to resort to slash and burn agriculture or some sort of non-sustainable land use, unless there's some ways that they can have a preferred nature land use. So I think those for me are the step change that's needed, and some of the innovation around that. And that's it. Then there's some nice photos. We have the Ranger Run. I think that's the Nyungwe guys. This is a mobile education platform, Le Petit Mouflon, we've got in Chad. That was our 1,000th elephant that we translocated from Luanda. The big bicycle race that we run in Akagera. Some education programs. This was quite fun. Matusadana team did a well done to Majeti on their 20th years and so it's quite nice to see the camaraderie across our various management teams. It's not isolated. Benin been very innovative in terms of revenue generation because they've lost tourism, selling other park products like honey, Balanites oil, these kind of things. Education programs, kids coming through Zakuma. And that's it. Dare to try, but don't be afraid to fail, because if we don't, we've seen what can happen. And that's it.
Okay, thanks.